I need you to do something real quick. Hit that like button, share this with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Uncle Sammy drops new karma stories every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it. My name is Damon, and I want to be straight with you before I say another word. Some of what I did in this story was wrong. Dead wrong. I owned it then, and I own it now. But the rest of it, every calculated, cold, deliberate step, I would do it again without blinking. This is the story of 14 years of marriage. One condom I found in the wrong place, and the slow unraveling of a lie so deep it had its own foundation. My wife's name was Celeste. We lived in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of Memphis, Tennessee, on a block where the neighbors knew your car by the sound of the engine. I managed operations for a mid-sized logistics company. Celeste worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center not far from downtown. On paper, we were solid. Celeste had this habit of tapping the side of her coffee mug with her thumbnail whenever she was thinking hard about something. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. I used to find it endearing. 14 years in, I barely notice it anymore. That's what long marriages do. They sand down the edges of the things that once made someone feel specific to you. We weren't unhappy, or at least I thought we weren't. We had a routine. Friday dinners at a Cajun spot on Beale Street. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market on Central Avenue. Sunday calls with her mother in Louisville. Ordinary. Comfortable. Ours. Or so I believed. It was a Tuesday evening in early March when everything quietly began to fall apart. Celeste had asked me to grab her jacket from the hall closet because she'd left her work badge in the pocket. I was half watching the news when I reached in and felt the jacket, then knocked her tote bag off the shelf by accident. The bag split open when it hit the floor. I crouched down to gather everything. Her chapstick, a hair tie, a folded receipt, and then my hand landed on something small and square wrapped in foil. A condom. Single. Still in the packaging. My throat went dry before my brain had fully registered what I was holding. Celeste and I had stopped using condoms 4 years earlier. She told me she'd switched to an IUD. We talked about it. I remember the conversation clearly. Sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, she said she wanted something longer term and more reliable. So why was there a condom in her bag? My mind started cycling through explanations. Maybe she grabbed it for a coworker. Maybe it was old, left over from before. Maybe it was a prank gift from one of her girlfriends. I stood there in the hallway, holding a foil square and trying to convince myself there was a reasonable answer to a question I hadn't even finished asking yet. I put the bag back on the shelf, gave her the jacket, sat back down in front of the TV, and watched the news anchor's mouth move, without hearing a single word. That night, I barely slept. I lay on my side of the bed listening to Celeste breathe, and running through years of small moments that I had dismissed as nothing. The way she'd started taking her phone to the bathroom. The new password on her laptop, when there'd never been one before. The way she laughed differently on certain phone calls. Lighter, almost girlish. And then went still and practical the moment she saw me in the doorway. I'd filed all of it under stress, under mood, under the ordinary distance that collects in long marriages. Lying there in the dark, I started pulling those files back out. I'll tell you what I did next, and I'll tell you clearly, it was reckless and I am not proud of it. I went to the hall closet the next morning after Celeste left for work. I found the condom still tucked inside a zippered pocket in her tote bag. I remember reading something once about red pepper and irritation, how it was used in crowd control sprays, how it caused burning that passed after washing with water. I told myself Celeste was a medical professional, that if anything went wrong, she'd know exactly what to do. I told myself a lot of things that morning that I now understand were just my rage in a lab coat. I found a syringe in the first aid box, mixed a small amount of cayenne pepper with water, and injected the tiniest amount I could manage into the sealed package. Then I put it back exactly where I found it. I'm not going to dress that up. It was wrong. It was dangerous. It was the act of a man who felt the ground shifting under his feet and grabbed for the nearest thing he could control. The moment I put the bag back on the shelf, I felt sick about it. But I also placed a small location tag, one I'd bought months earlier to track my car after a break-in scare, into the inner lining of that same tote bag. That Part 1, Stand Behind. I needed to see where she was going when she told me she was somewhere else. The first 2 weeks after that were agony dressed up as normal life. I went to work. I came home. I grilled chicken on Saturdays and watched basketball on Sunday nights. Celeste moved through the house the same as always, making her grocery list on the back of envelopes, leaving her shoes just slightly too close to the door for me to get past without nudging them. But I was watching her now in a way I never had before. Not lovingly. Clinically, I was cataloging. And the catalog was filling up faster than I wanted it to. She started coming home late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Physical therapy sessions run long, she told me. Equipment issues at the center. A client with complicated recovery needs. All of it sounded reasonable. None of it was verifiable without me looking like a suspicious husband, which I was, but I wasn't ready to show that card yet. One Thursday, I drove to the rehabilitation center at 7:30 in the evening. Her car wasn't in the lot. I sat there for 20 minutes and watched the lot thin out until I was the only one left. I drove home and had dinner alone and told her when she came in at 8:40 that something smelled good, but I'd already eaten. A man named Terrence started coming up in conversation. Not constantly, not in an obvious way, but consistently. Terrence from the center, who had a way of reading patients that most therapists didn't develop until their second decade. Terrence, who had organized a staff retreat last fall. Terrence brought homemade food on Fridays because, Celeste said with a small smile, he liked to take care of people. I stored every mention without reacting to a single one. What I noticed more than the name was the way she said it, with a warmth that had no self-consciousness in it. The kind of warmth people only use when they don't yet realize they've revealed something. I found my old college roommate, Kendrick, through a mutual friend on social media. Kendrick had spent the last several years doing private investigation work out of Nashville and occasionally took cases in the Memphis area. I called him on a Wednesday afternoon from my car in the parking garage at work. I told him what I had and what I needed. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I wanted facts, dates, times, locations. I wanted to know if Terrence had a wife or a partner, because something in my gut already knew this wasn't just a work friendship, and I needed to understand the full picture before I decided what to do with it. Kendrick called me back 4 days later. Terrence Wallace. I am 41 years old, licensed physical therapist. He lived in Germantown, a suburb east of Memphis. He had a long-term girlfriend named Renata who taught elementary school in Collierville. They had been together for 6 years. No children. Kendrick said the two of them, Terrence and Celeste, had been seen together at a hotel near the airport on 2 separate occasions in the past month alone. He texted me a time-stamped summary. I read it 3 times sitting in the parking garage with the engine off, and then I drove home and made pasta and asked Celeste about her day. That same week, Celeste mentioned she was thinking about visiting her cousin Brianna in Houston for a long weekend. Brianna was going through something hard, she said. I needed company. I told her that I was thoughtful of her. I asked which hotel she was planning to stay at since Brianna lived in a studio apartment and didn't really have room for guests. Celeste said Brianna had recently moved and had a real place now. I nodded and said nothing else. After she went to bed, I sent Brianna a message through Facebook asking her to call me when she had a moment. Brianna called the next morning. She had not spoken to Celeste in 2 months and had not moved anywhere. I checked the location tag. The Friday Celeste left for Houston, the tag moved south on I-55 for about 20 minutes and then turned east. Not toward Memphis International. Not toward any highway that led to Texas. It stopped moving at a point that corresponded, when I pulled it up on the map, to a resort area near Tunica. I sat in my car outside a hardware store with the map open on my phone, and I let the facts arrange themselves into the picture they'd been forming for weeks. Then I called Kendrick. He was already there by the time I arrived. He'd driven down when I gave him the tag coordinates. We sat in his car in the parking lot of a gas station about a mile from the resort, and he showed me what he had. Celeste's car was in the resort lot. Terrence's car was there too. He had checked them in that morning, according to a contact he had on staff, under Terrence's name. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I told Kendrick what I needed next. Not confrontation. Documentation. I wanted a record. I wanted dates, receipts, photographs of the vehicles, and anything else that put them in the same place at the same time over the past several months. He said he'd have it by the end of the following week. I drove home. I cooked. I watched television. I called my mother and talked to her about nothing important for 45 minutes because I needed to hear a voice that had no lies in it. My mother asked if I was all right, and I said I was tired. She said I sounded more than tired. I told her it had been a long week at work. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time with the lights off and the refrigerator humming, and I thought about 14 years, the wedding, the apartment we rented before we bought the house, the miscarriage we went through in year 3 that we never talked about enough afterward, the version of Celeste I had married, and the version sitting in a resort room 60 miles away. The report Kendrick gave me 10 days later was thorough. The affair had been running for at least 7 months. They had used the rehabilitation center after hours 3 times, twice when Celeste was supposedly covering evening shifts. They had used a hotel near the airport 4 times. The Tunica resort was the 5th documented meeting. Kendrick had also pieced together, through careful listening, that Renata, Terrence's girlfriend, had no knowledge of any of this. She was still teaching her second graders in Collierville and attending PTA meetings and making plans with Terrence for a vacation they were supposed to take in July. Reading that made me feel specific, kind of tired. I don't have a better word for. I thought for a long time about what to do with the information about Renata. I knew what it felt like to be the person who didn't know. I had been sitting inside that feeling for weeks, and it was its own particular kind of suffering. The low-grade nausea of suspecting something you can't yet prove, of looking at someone's face and searching for a truth they're deliberately withholding. I did not want to be cruel about how I handled Renata, but I also thought about someone doing for me what I was about to do for her, and I decided I would want to know. I wrote her a letter, not anonymous this time. My name, my phone number, a brief explanation of who I was and how I had come to have the information I was sharing. I included copies of 2 of the dated photographs Kendrick had taken, the vehicles in the hotel lot, visible and identifiable. I told her I was sorry. I told her she deserved to make her own choices with the full truth in front of her. I mailed it on a Monday. I did not tell Celeste anything. I went to the gym that evening and ran on the treadmill for 40 minutes longer than usual because I needed my body to be doing something physical while my mind worked through what came next. 3 days after I mailed the letter, Celeste came home from work distracted in a way that was different from her usual distraction. She sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through her phone with a stillness that wasn't restful. She said Terrence was dealing with some personal issues. His relationship was going through a rough patch. I made a sound I hoped passed for sympathetic and asked what kind of rough patch. She said she didn't know the details, just that he seemed stressed. I said that was too bad, and I asked what she wanted for dinner. The following Tuesday, Celeste told me she needed to go back into work for an evening session with a client who had limited daytime availability. I said that was fine. I waited 20 minutes after she left. Then I pulled up the location tag. She drove to the rehabilitation center. That surprised me. They were meeting at her actual workplace now. I sat with that for a moment. Then I got in my car. I didn't plan what I was going to do. I just drove. When I pulled into the center side parking lot, I could see lights on in one of the back therapy rooms through the window blinds. I parked and I waited. At 9:40, the side door opened. Celeste came out first. Terrence followed. They stood near his car and he was bent slightly forward, one hand pressed against his lower abdomen, his face pulled tight. Celeste had her hand on his arm and was speaking quietly with the focused expression she used at work when someone was in real distress. I got out of my car and walked across the lot. They both saw me at the same moment. Celeste went completely still. Terrence straightened up and then immediately regretted it. I told him it was red pepper. I told him to wash with water, and it would pass within the hour. His expression ran through about 4 different things in rapid succession: pain, confusion, anger, then something that looked almost like fear when he understood what the sequence of events meant. Celeste looked at me, and I could see her running calculations behind her eyes, trying to figure out how long I had known, and what I had done, and what I knew, and what came next. I told her the condom had been in her bag for almost a month. I told her I had known for a while. I told Terrence that his girlfriend Renata had received a letter from me last week and that she now had the same information I had. His face went the color of old concrete. Before I say anything else, let me pause this story right here. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. Uncle Sammy tells these real human stories every week, and you do not want to catch them late. Drop a like, share this with someone who needs it, and let's keep going. I did not raise my voice. That surprised all three of us, I think, including me. I had imagined this moment many times in the preceding weeks, and in most of those imaginations, I was loud or cold or cutting. Standing in that parking lot under the sodium lights, I just felt tired. I told Celeste that I had moved out of the house that afternoon. I had arranged a furnished apartment in Midtown through a co-worker who managed rental properties. My clothes, my personal files, the things that mattered to me, they were already there. What remained in our house on the east side was hers to deal with. She said my name once, just Damon, like a door closing. I told her the divorce papers would be filed before the end of the week. I told her I was not interested in conversation, not that night and not anytime soon, because I've been having the wrong conversation with myself for months, trying to make the evidence point somewhere other than where it pointed, and I was finished doing mental work on her behalf. Terrence tried to say something. I turned and looked at him long enough for him to decide against it. Then I walked back to my car. The apartment in Midtown was on the third floor of a building near Overton Park. It had high ceilings and a window that looked out over the tree line. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night with a gas station sandwich and a bottle of water, and I listened to the city through the screen. Memphis has a particular sound at night. Not chaotic, just persistent, like something always running beneath the surface. I sat there for a long time. Then I called my mother and told her the truth. She didn't say I told you so, even though she'd had her reservations about Celeste from early on. Nothing she could name. She used to say, just a feeling. She asked if I had eaten. I said yes. She asked if I had someone to talk to. I said I was working on that. She said she was going to drive up from Jackson the following weekend, and I told her she didn't have to, and she said she knew that. We stayed on the phone for an hour. She had the television on in the background, and every so often I'd catch a familiar sound from it, and the normalcy of that was the closest thing to comfort I had that night. I filed for divorce on Thursday. My attorney, a precise woman named Lorraine who had been practicing family law in Memphis for 22 years, reviewed everything Kendrick had documented. She told me I was in a strong position. Tennessee is a fault-based divorce state when the evidence supports it, and what I had supported thoroughly. She walked me through the process in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has seen this particular human wreckage many times before and has developed a professional gentleness about it. She also told me what I needed to hear. This was going to take months, but it was going to be over. I heard from Renata 2 weeks after I mailed the letter. She called my number, the one I'd included, on a Saturday morning. Her voice was steadier than I expected. She said she wanted to thank me for telling her, and she wanted me to know she had already spoken to an attorney of her own. She said she found the photographs I'd included persuasive, mostly because they confirmed things she had been sensing for months and hadn't trusted herself to believe. She said sometimes the hardest part isn't the finding out. It's the permission to trust what you already felt. I understood that completely. The months that followed were not clean or simple or full of satisfying resolution. Divorce rarely is, regardless of who's at fault. There were property disputes and mediation sessions, and a period where Celeste sent messages through our mutual friends that I didn't respond to. Terrence and Renata ended. Celeste and Terrence apparently tried to continue, because the point in an affair isn't always a specific person. Sometimes it's a feeling of being chosen, and when that feeling gets dragged into ordinary daylight, it often turns out to be smaller than it seemed in the dark. I heard all of this secondhand, and I didn't go looking for any of it. I started therapy in April. Not because I was falling apart, but because my mother suggested it, and I respected her enough to try. My therapist was a man named Dr. Osei, who worked out a quiet office near Germantown. He had a round face and a habit of letting silences stretch until you filled them, which I found irritating for the first 3 sessions, and then started to appreciate. He didn't tell me what to feel. He helped me understand what I was already feeling, which turned out to be a different and more useful thing. I went every other Wednesday for the better part of a year. What Dr. Osei helped me untangle was this. I had been good at the logistics of our marriage and poor at the interior of it. I could tell you every anniversary, every doctor's appointment, every routine we'd built over 14 years. What I could not tell you, when he pressed me honestly, was the last time I had asked Celeste what she actually wanted from her life. Not from the weekend or the vacation or the renovation project. From her life. He didn't say that excuse for anything she did. He said it helped me understand what had been quietly eroding underneath a marriage that looked functional from the outside. There was a conversation I kept coming back to in therapy. About 2 years before everything fell apart, Celeste and I had sat at the kitchen table after dinner on a Sunday, and she had said, in a tone I'd filed under small talk, that she sometimes felt like she was doing the same thing on a loop, same shifts, same commute, same weekends. I told her everyone felt that way sometimes. I told her things would open up when I got through a busy stretch at work. I suggested a vacation. She nodded and cleared the dishes. I went back to watching television. In the therapist's office 2 years later, I understood that she had not been making small talk. About 8 months after the divorce was filed and 6 months after it was finalized, I got a call from Kendrick. Not about the case. That was long closed. He was calling because he had run into Celeste at a gas station near Midtown, and she looked, in his words, not good. He wasn't calling to make me feel something about it. He just thought I should know. I thanked him, and I sat with it for a few days. Then I wrote her a letter. Not a long one. 2 paragraphs. I told her I had heard she was going through a hard time, and I wanted her to know that despite everything, I did not wish her suffering. I told her I had my own things to work through, and I expected she did too, and I hoped she found the support she needed. I did not leave a return address. I don't know if she wrote back. I had moved by then, a house in East Memphis near the Coupillon neighborhood, a place I found on my own with no input from anyone, which felt important. It had a yard I didn't know what to do with, and eventually planted with things my mother recommended. Tomatoes in the spring, herbs along the back fence, something physical and patient to pay attention to. I started going to a jazz club on Thursday nights with a coworker named Bernard who played bass in a weekend band and knew everyone. I started sleeping through the night again, which sounds minor and isn't. The thing about surviving a betrayal that size is that it teaches you things about yourself that are uncomfortable to learn. I learned I had confused consistency with presence. I showed up every day of that marriage, physically, financially, logistically, and told myself that was enough. Maybe because it was easier than the alternative being sitting across from someone you love and asking the inconvenient questions, telling them the truth about your fears, asking them to tell you theirs, doing the slow, uncomfortable, ongoing work of actually knowing another person. I had been good at marriage as a structure. I had been less good at marriage as a relationship. About 14 months after the divorce, I met a woman named Simone at a gallery. Opening Bernard dragged me to the South Main Arts District. She was a landscape architect who had grown up in Nashville and relocated to Memphis for a project that turned into a career. She had a specific and dry sense of humor and strong opinions about coffee, and she asked me more questions in 2 hours than I could remember anyone asking me in years. Not interrogating, genuinely curious. The way some people listen like they're actually collecting you, not just waiting to speak. We had dinner the following week, and then again, and then again. What I noticed about being with Simone early on was how different it felt to be asked directly about the things that mattered. She would look up from whatever she was doing and say something like, "What are you actually worried about with that? Not what you think about it. What are you worried about?" It was a small difference in phrasing that opened things up differently. I found myself answering honestly in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I also found myself asking her things I should have been asking people for years. We argued sometimes about small things, about directions, about how to spend Sunday, and the arguments resolved because we both talked through them instead of letting them sediment into something we'd trip over later. 2 years after I had stood in that parking lot on the east side of Memphis and watched everything I thought I knew come apart at the seams, I was sitting in my backyard in Coupillon on a Saturday afternoon while Simone read in the other lawn chair and the tomatoes came in heavy on the vine and the jazz from a neighbor's radio drifted over the fence. It was ordinary in a way that ordinary feels like a gift when you know what it costs to get there. I thought about 14 years and 7 months of a secret and a foil square and a location tag sewn into a tote bag lining and all the decisions that have followed. The pepper, that was fear. The rest of it, that was me learning the hard way how to stop disappearing inside a life and start living inside one. The divorce papers sat framed on nobody's wall. There was no dramatic final moment, no villain's confession, no applause. There was just a Tuesday afternoon in May when the court process concluded and Lorraine sent me an email, say it was done, and I read the email in my car outside the grocery store, and then I went inside and bought things for dinner. That's how the end of marriage actually lands. Quietly between errands, like a door closing in another room. The sound reaches you a little late, and by then you've already moved on to the next thing. Renata eventually reached out once more, about a year after that first phone call. A short message. She was well. She had moved to Knoxville for a new position. She was seeing someone who made her laugh. She wanted me to know she was okay. I wrote back 2 sentences. I said I was glad. I said take care of yourself. Some connections exist only to pass a truth between 2 people at the moment they most need it. And then they're finished, and that's not a sad thing. That's just what they were always supposed to be. Celeste, I was told through a mutual friend who eventually broke the unspoken agreement of silence, had left Memphis. She had taken a position at a facility in Indianapolis and was starting over. I felt nothing about that for a while. And then later I felt something close to a distant wish that she found whatever she had been looking for. Not because I forgave a deception easily. I didn't. But because carrying permanent anger at someone who is already gone from your life is the kind of weight you carry alone. And I had put down enough weight by then to know what lighter felt like. Simone and I got married on a Saturday in October at the Botanical Garden off Central Avenue, with her family from Nashville and my mother from Jackson, and Bernard playing something slow and warm on the bass before the ceremony started. I gave a short speech at the reception. I talked about communication, about what it means to really ask and really answer, about the cost of assuming you know someone because you share a house and a routine. I didn't name the 14 years I'd spent learning those lessons, but they were in every sentence. My mother cried. Bernard made a joke I can't repeat here. Simone rolled her eyes at him and then took my hand under the table and squeezed it twice, and I knew exactly what that meant without having to ask. That's the part of the story they don't tell you in the revenge narratives. The justice part, whatever form it takes, lasts about as long as the confrontation. The rest of it, the actual rebuilding, the learning, the choosing to do things differently the second time, that takes years. It's unglamorous and repetitive, and it happens in ordinary rooms. But it's also the only part that actually changes anything. The pepper, the location tag, the letter to Renata, the divorce papers on the lawyer's desk. Those were the endings of one story. Everything that came after was the beginning of a different one. And the second story is the one I would choose. That's the story, and I hope it hit you somewhere real. If it did, smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Uncle Sammy is here every week with more stories like this one, real, raw, and nothing short of the truth. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how you would have handled this. I read every single one. See you in the next story. The end.